Colonel Raymond Stone had been away from England for almost 10 years. He had served in different countries, leading troops, managing missions, and building a strong name for himself. Now he was finally back, and he had been given a special role in London, close to the heart of the country, Buckingham Palace. He arrived early in the morning. The skies were gray, and the air had that familiar London chill. His black boots clicked against the pavement as he walked through the palace gates, his eyes taking in every detail. Guards stood still in their bright red uniforms and tall black hats. Tourists gathered around, snapping photos, whispering, and pointing. Colonel Stone walked with purpose. He believed in order, tradition, and discipline. He had heard stories about the royal guards, how they never moved, never reacted, no matter what. He thought those stories were exaggerated. After all, he was a colonel. When he gave an order, people listened. As he continued walking past the gates, he spotted a royal guard standing alone at his post. The guard was young, standing tall and silent. Colonel Stone stopped a few feet away. He looked closely at the guard's uniform, checking how polished his buttons were, how clean his boots looked, and how still he stood. The tourists around noticed the colonel's presence. They slowly moved closer, sensing that something was about to happen. Cameras were already pointing at the scene. Colonel Stone didn't care. He was used to attention. He believed that every soldier, no matter what their duty, should show respect to higher-ranking officers. He took one firm step forward and spoke in a strong, clear voice. "You there, soldier. Salute your superior." The crowd went quiet. The wind blew softly through the trees, but the guard didn't move. Not even a blink. His eyes stayed forward. His hands stayed at his sides. He stood as if he hadn't heard anything. Colonel Stone raised an eyebrow. Maybe the guard didn't hear him. Maybe he was too focused. He stepped a little closer and repeated the order, louder this time. "I said, salute your superior." Again, nothing. Not a twitch. Not a turn of the head. The guard remained like a statue. The colonel crossed his arms. This was unusual. He wasn't used to being ignored. His mind began to race. Was the guard being disrespectful? Was this some sort of mistake? Whispers spread through the crowd. Some people began filming. Others just watched, wide-eyed. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. Colonel Stone stood in front of the guard, trying to decide what to do. He didn't like being challenged, especially not in public. But something about the guard's stillness, something about the way he didn't even glance, felt different. This wasn't rudeness. It was something else, something deeper. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by curious eyes and clicking cameras, Colonel Stone realized this was not going to be a normal day. Colonel Stone stood tall in front of the royal guard. The silence between them grew heavier by the second. Behind him, the sound of soft murmurs and camera clicks filled the air. Tourists had gathered in a small crowd, drawn in by the tension. Many had stopped walking just to see what was going on. Some held their phones up, ready to record anything that might happen. The royal guard didn't move. His face was calm. His hands stayed tightly by his sides. He stared forward, not making eye contact with the colonel, not even blinking more than usual. It was as if he was carved from stone. Colonel Stone wasn't used to this kind of reaction. In every place he had served, his rank had brought instant attention and respect. Orders were followed. Heads turned. Soldiers moved. But this young man, standing in front of Buckingham Palace, didn't even react to a direct command. The colonel's tone grew sharper. "Soldier, that was a direct order," he said, stepping even closer. "You will salute your superior officer immediately." The guard remained still. A boy in the crowd whispered to his mother, "Why isn't the soldier doing anything?" The mother leaned down and quietly explained that the guards are trained not to move, no matter what happens around them. Stone heard the whisper. It made him pause for a second, but his pride wouldn't let him back away so easily. He turned back to the guard, narrowing his eyes. "Are you disobeying a direct command?" he asked. The guard didn't answer. His eyes stared ahead, focused, calm, and distant. Colonel Stone stepped back just a little. He wasn't angry yet, but he was puzzled. Maybe the rules here were different. Maybe this post had its own set of duties. Still, something about being ignored, especially in front of a crowd, didn't sit right with him. He looked at the crowd, then back at the guard. "You will answer me," he said again. His voice was loud, firm, and full of command. Still, no response. A few people in the crowd gasped quietly. Others exchanged glances. The air around them felt like it was waiting for something, some kind of reply, some kind of action. But none came. The royal guard remained perfectly still. Stone's hand moved slightly, not to touch the guard, but as if he was thinking about what to do next. He had never felt unsure in front of a soldier before. Now, standing in the center of London among strangers and cameras, he realized this moment was becoming something more than just an order. It was turning into a test, not just of the guard's strength, but of his own understanding. And as the clock above the palace ticked slowly forward, Colonel Stone began to understand that this wasn't just any soldier. This was a royal guard, and they were trained for moments exactly like this. Colonel Stone stood silently for a few moments, trying to make sense of what was happening. Around him, the crowd's whispers grew louder. Tourists leaned in, hoping to capture every moment on their cameras. They were seeing something that didn't happen every day. An officer giving a command, and a royal guard standing his ground, unshaken. The colonel shifted his stance, his boots scraping against the stone ground. He had seen many soldiers respond quickly to his orders. Whether they were on the battlefield or in training, everyone knew the importance of respect and obedience to rank. But here, in the heart of London, in front of the palace gates, things were different. He looked at the guard again. The young man's posture was perfect, straight as an arrow, his uniform spotless, his hat held at just the right angle. The colonel had to admit the guard was disciplined. But what troubled him was the complete lack of response to his commands. Stone had expected a quick salute, a shift in position, or at least a change in the guard's facial expression. But there was nothing, just stillness. It was almost as if the guard was lost in his own world, far away from the bustling city around him. Yet Stone knew that could never be the case. These guards were trained for moments like this, trained to remain focused and unaffected by the chaos of the world. The colonel's mind raced. Was this some sort of challenge? Was the guard testing him, perhaps to see if he understood the rules? Stone had always believed that discipline was about control, but now, in front of this young soldier, he began to question his understanding of it. The power to control a situation didn't always come from issuing orders. Sometimes it came from patience and restraint. "Soldier," Stone said once more, this time softer, as though trying to connect. "Why aren't you following my command?" The guard didn't blink, didn't shift, he didn't say a word. Stone stood back, a little frustrated but also intrigued. In his entire career, he had never encountered a soldier who refused to move when ordered. This was different, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized this wasn't a matter of defiance. It was a matter of duty. The tourists were still watching, some recording, some whispering. The atmosphere around them felt tense, as though everyone was waiting for something important to happen. But nothing did. The guard simply stood, unmoving, unflinching. He had no need to prove anything to anyone. His task wasn't to obey every command without question. It was to protect his post and honor the crown. Colonel Stone stepped back, taking a deep breath. For a moment, he just observed. He watched the guard, standing there like a statue, completely unbothered by the scene unfolding around him. Stone realized this was a moment for him to learn, not command. The Royal Guard's stillness wasn't about resistance. It was about duty. And in that quiet moment, Stone finally understood the depth of it. Colonel Stone stood in front of the Royal Guard, his mind trying to piece together everything he had just learned. The crowd around them had fallen into a strange silence, as though everyone was holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. Stone could feel their eyes on him, but he didn't mind. He was used to attention. He was used to giving orders and seeing them carried out. But now, in this moment, he felt out of place. He glanced at the guard again, who was still standing perfectly still. Stone had never seen such dedication before. This guard was not only refusing to salute, he was refusing to do anything other than his duty. It was as if the world around him didn't matter, only the responsibility he had at that very moment. Stone had always thought that military discipline was about following orders, no matter what. But he was beginning to realize that there was something deeper at play here. This young guard wasn't just following orders. He was honoring a code, a set of rules that went beyond rank and authority. It wasn't about who gave the command. It was about his commitment to the role he had been assigned. The colonel took a slow step back, watching the guard. He knew the guard had been trained for this. He had been taught to stand still, no matter what happened around him. It wasn't just about ignoring distractions. It was about remaining focused, maintaining composure, and keeping a sense of duty even when things seemed to fall apart. Stone's respect for the young guard grew. He had been expecting obedience, but what he saw was something more valuable: discipline. The kind of discipline that didn't need to prove itself through words or actions. It was the discipline of knowing what was important and sticking to it, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable it might be. The colonel thought back to his own years of training. He had been taught to lead with strength, to command respect through his actions. But here, in front of this young soldier, he saw a different kind of strength, one that didn't need to be shown. It was silent, unwavering, and firm. The Royal Guard's discipline was not about following orders to the letter. It was about standing firm in the face of everything else. Stone had been a soldier his whole life, and in all his years, he had never experienced anything like this. He had always assumed that power came from command, but now he was beginning to see that true strength came from restraint. The guard's silence, his refusal to react, was a powerful statement in itself. It was a reminder that some moments required not action, but patience. He glanced around at the crowd again, who were still watching, some confused, some in awe. Stone realized that this wasn't just a test of the guard's discipline. It was a test of his own understanding. What kind of leader was he if he couldn't understand this simple act of stillness? He stepped back once more, this time with a deep sense of respect. The guard hadn't moved, but Stone felt like something had shifted inside him. For the first time, he understood what it meant to truly honor a duty. Colonel Stone stood back for a moment, his thoughts swirling. He could feel the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. He had come to the palace expecting to show his strength, expecting to issue commands that would be obeyed without question. Yet here he was, standing in front of a young guard who had not budged an inch, whose silence had become louder than any words could have been. The colonel tried to steady himself, but his mind was still racing. He had seen many forms of discipline in his life, but this level of focus and commitment was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The guard stood there, unmoving, his eyes forward and unblinking, as though the world around him had faded into nothingness. To the colonel, it was like looking at a statue, but one that seemed to possess a power all its own. Just as Stone was about to speak again, something unexpected happened. The guard shifted ever so slightly. It wasn't a full movement, just a small adjustment of his feet. It was so subtle that at first, Stone wasn't sure if he had seen it. But then the guard's gaze flickered, just for a brief moment, and he spoke. "Sir, I cannot salute while on duty." The words were calm, clear, and respectful, but they were also firm. There was no hesitation in the guard's voice. The colonel blinked in surprise. This was the first time the guard had spoken, and he hadn't expected it to come like this. Stone had been bracing for a confrontation, for a moment where the guard would challenge him directly. Instead, the guard had quietly explained why he couldn't comply with the order. Stone was taken aback. He had assumed that the guard would either salute or remain silent, but this explanation gave him a new understanding of the situation. The royal guards weren't there to simply obey commands. They were there to carry out their duties with a level of respect and professionalism that went beyond the usual chain of command. The colonel stood still, processing what the guard had said. It wasn't just about orders. It was about duty and respect. The guard's duty wasn't to salute a superior officer when it wasn't part of the rules. His focus was on guarding the palace, not on the hierarchy of rank. And in that moment, Colonel Stone understood that the guard's silence and stillness weren't acts of defiance. They were acts of commitment to a responsibility far greater than any single person. The crowd had begun to murmur again, but this time it was quieter, as though they were all absorbing the significance of what had just happened. The tourists had seen something few would ever witness. A soldier standing his ground, not out of defiance, but out of a sense of deep duty. Colonel Stone felt a mixture of respect and admiration. He took a step back, nodding slowly, acknowledging the guard's position. There was nothing else to say. He understood now. The young man in front of him wasn't just following orders. He was upholding a tradition, one that demanded more than obedience. It demanded an unwavering commitment to honor and responsibility. With a final, respectful nod, Stone turned and walked away, his mind clearer than it had been in a long time. The lesson he had just learned was simple, yet profound. True strength doesn't always come from issuing commands. Sometimes it comes from knowing when not to act. As Colonel Stone walked away, the sound of his boots echoed on the stone pavement, but his mind was far from the familiar rhythm of his steps. The encounter with the royal guard had left him feeling unsettled, yet oddly enlightened. The crowd was still there, some of them staring at the young soldier, others watching Stone as he moved away. The camera flashes had slowed, and whispers began to fade as people returned to their sightseeing. Yet for Stone, the lesson had not been something he could easily forget. As he walked down the pathway towards one of the palace entrances, a palace official appeared at his side. The man was dressed in formal attire, his face calm but serious. Stone recognized him immediately. He was a senior staff member who managed the palace's daily operations and protocol. The official had seen what happened and knew exactly why the colonel had paused in front of the guard. "Colonel Stone," the official began in a low voice, "if I may explain." Stone stopped in his tracks, turning to face the man. "Please go ahead." The official nodded, his expression neutral. The royal guards, as you may know, follow a strict set of rules. It's not just about following orders from anyone. They are trained to uphold the duties they are assigned, which means not reacting to anything that could disrupt their focus. Their role is not to salute or respond to commands during their posts, regardless of the rank of the person giving the order. Stone blinked, surprised by the explanation. He had assumed that, like any soldier, the royal guards were expected to follow orders immediately. But the official's words made him realize how deeply ingrained this tradition was in their training. It wasn't about the chain of command. It was about a higher responsibility, one that required them to stay calm, focused, and undistracted no matter what happened. "So, it's not disrespect," Stone said slowly, trying to understand. He wasn't ignoring me on purpose. The official shook his head. "Not at all, Colonel. He was simply honoring his duty. The royal guards are trained to remain still and composed during their posts. It's not about defying authority. It's about remaining focused on their responsibility to the crown." Stone absorbed the information. He hadn't known all the details of how the guards operated, but now he understood why the young soldier had stood so firm in his silence. It wasn't out of rebellion. It was because his duty to the palace was greater than any personal exchange. The weight of the crown and its traditions were far more important than any individual rank or order. "I see," Stone replied quietly. "I misunderstood." The official nodded again, his face softening slightly. "It happens. These things are not always easy to understand if you're not familiar with the rules. But the royal guards are among the most disciplined soldiers in the world. They carry with them centuries of tradition." Stone's mind was spinning as he looked back at the guard still standing at his post. The young man had done nothing wrong. In fact, he had shown the colonel something that no one else had. It wasn't about power or rank. It was about a quiet, unwavering commitment to duty. Stone let out a breath, feeling a mix of respect and humility. The lesson had been hard-earned, but it was one he would carry with him for the rest of his career. He turned to the official once more and said, "Thank you for the explanation. I appreciate it." With that, he walked away a little wiser than before, and much more aware of the true weight of tradition and duty. Colonel Stone walked through the palace grounds, his footsteps quieter now, more measured. The earlier tension had lifted, but his mind was still focused on the events that had unfolded. He had been so sure of his position earlier, so certain that his commands would be obeyed without question. But now he realized there was so much he hadn't known. The world of the royal guards was different from anything he had encountered in his military career, and for the first time he felt a deep respect for the quiet strength that these soldiers carried. As he walked past the grand buildings, Stone couldn't help but notice the contrast between the chaos of the tourists around him and the stillness of the guards. People came and went, snapping pictures, laughing, and pointing at the history around them. But the guards stood firm, unmoved by the distractions. It was a reminder of how easy it was to get lost in the noise of the world and forget the importance of staying focused on what truly mattered. Stone reached a quiet corner of the palace garden, a peaceful spot far from the crowds. He paused there, taking in the calmness of the space. The flowers were in full bloom, their bright colors standing out against the stone walls of the palace. The air was fresh, and the soft rustling of leaves added to the stillness. It was a sharp contrast to the busy streets and the noisy tourists, and it gave Stone the space to reflect on what he had learned. The young guard's unwavering focus, his commitment to his duty above all else, had struck a chord in him. Stone had always believed that discipline was about action, about responding to commands swiftly and with authority. But now he understood that sometimes true discipline meant standing still. Sometimes it was about resisting the urge to react and instead remaining steadfast in the face of uncertainty. It wasn't an easy lesson to learn. Stone had spent years building his career on the belief that leadership meant action. He had expected others to follow his lead, to respond to his commands. But the Royal Guard had shown him that leadership also involved patience, understanding when to act and when to simply remain silent and focus on the task at hand. As he stood in the garden, Stone thought about how he could apply this new understanding to his own work. He realized that leadership wasn't just about giving orders. It was about respecting the roles and responsibilities of others. It was about knowing when to step back and allow those under his command to carry out their duties without interference. And it was about trusting the people he led to make the right choices, just as the royal guard had done in his presence. For the first time in a long time, Colonel Stone felt a sense of peace. The world was not always as simple as he had once believed, and sometimes the most important lessons came from the quietest moments. He had learned to see leadership in a new light, and he was grateful for the unexpected lesson. He took a deep breath, feeling a newfound clarity. It was time to return to his duties, but he knew that this lesson would stay with him. It had changed him in a way he hadn't expected, and he was better for it. Colonel Stone stood outside the palace gates, looking back one last time at the royal guard standing tall in his place. The young soldier was still at his post, unmoving, his eyes fixed straight ahead. It was as though time had slowed down, and everything around him faded into the background. Stone realized that this guard had not only fulfilled his duty, but had also shown him something far greater than what he had expected that day. As he watched the guard, Stone's thoughts began to settle. The lesson he had learned from this encounter was clear now. Leadership wasn't just about making decisions, issuing commands, or having power over others. It was about understanding, patience, and the ability to know when to act, and when not to. Sometimes a leader needed to step back and trust those under their command to do their part, to carry out their responsibilities without interference. Stone had come to the palace with an expectation that his authority would be recognized immediately. He had assumed that a soldier, no matter his rank, would follow an order without question. But the royal guard had shown him that true discipline didn't always involve immediate action. Sometimes the greatest strength lay in standing firm, in maintaining a sense of purpose even when faced with confusion or distraction. It was an important lesson, one he had never anticipated but would never forget. The tourists had long since moved on, and the crowds had begun to thin out. But Stone remained, lost in thought, reflecting on the events of the day. He thought about his own career, the many years he had spent in the military, and how much he had relied on his ability to control situations. But now he saw things differently. There was strength in silence, in stillness, and in the quiet dedication that the royal guard had demonstrated. After a while, Stone took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the lesson settle in. He had learned something important, something that would stay with him throughout his career. Leadership wasn't about demanding respect. It was about earning it through understanding. It was about recognizing the strengths of those around you and allowing them the space to do their work without unnecessary interference. With a sense of calm, Stone turned and walked away from the palace, the day's events still fresh in his mind. He felt a new sense of clarity. The world of military discipline had expanded for him. He now understood that sometimes the most powerful thing a leader could do was allow others to do their jobs with trust and confidence. As he walked down the path, Stone smiled to himself, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't expected. He had entered the palace gates expecting to teach, but in the end it was the royal guard who had shown him the greatest lesson of all. And in that moment he knew he would be a better leader because of it. Finn.